so neat and clean. You are. You're so neat and clean. Hello, BookTube. And welcome back to your Daily Penguin. This is our tour through my Penguin Classic wall, book by book. I have to say, for all the other reasons that I've been so happy that I finally realized that I should just leave my email address on every video. For all the other benefits of that, one of the great benefits in 2020 has been hearing from all of you as we go through these penguins together. And here's your reflections on these books. Have you ever heard about these authors? Have you ever read them? Do you have an edition that you prefer to the Penguin or whatnot? All that is just fascinating to me. And it's been highlighted a bit recently because we've been bouncing all around when it comes to subject matter. And that is true today as well. Today we are moving into my beloved Edwardian era. the Edwardian era, it's only 10 years long. It benefited from the after effects of the Victorian era, the long Victorian era, which I've said on this channel many times. I consider to be the greatest creative period in human history. Far, far more so than Periclean Athens or the Quattrocento or the Enlightenment. It's the Victorians that moved, the Victorian era that moved the whole world forward in terms of literature, in terms of poetry, in terms of drama, in terms of science, all the branches of science, in terms of scientific discoveries and theories, in terms of religion, religious writing, mystical writing, history. And that was an explosion. That long, that 50-year period was an explosion. I think it helped to feed on itself and encourage itself and grow because of itself. And then Queen Victoria died, and her son became King Edward, and he only ruled for 10 years. But I believe the Edwardian era has a specific flavor of its own when you look at its art especially, but also its music or its books. Because you've got that shadow of the Victorian era hanging over you, but Grandma has left the room. the king, when Edward became king, he was not a young man anymore. He was in the full flush of middle age, but he had about him an air of the irresponsible schoolboy, and he maintained that right to the end. And that has an effect on the zeitgeist of a society, just the same way it did during the Regency period, where all of a sudden you feel like your adult supervision has been lessened quite a bit, and maybe there's a little more call for invention or license. And you get writers who will react to different ways to that. Some of them embrace that, and hence in the long Edwardian period, which I would list from when Victoria is still alive but no longer a really active part of social life, to the immediate aftermath of King Edward's death. But either way, even if you just list it to 10 years, you've got some people who embraced that sense of experimentation, that the birth of modernism, the birth of futurism, all that sort of stuff. And then you've got people who became extra starched to resist it. And I don't know how you would categorize our author today. Maybe a combination of those two things. But this is a quintessential Edwardian figure. And it's E.M. Forster, who was born in 1879. So he came to the full maturity of his mind, his schooling, his social standing, and also his art squarely during that Edwardian decade. And wrote, he only wrote a tiny handful of novels, as Anthony Burgess used to quip, that he's the one who ruined it for everybody else by writing only a handful of stately, perfect novels and making anybody who did more than that seem like a time-jobbing hack. And I might agree with that criticism, because Burgess, for instance, wrote his whole life, and a huge amount of what he wrote is very worthwhile. We'd be much poorer if all writers adhered to the E.M. Forster the Ian Forster mold, only doing 6 or 7 novels and being very dignified and technically perfect about it all. But he started. I think I have a bunch of Penguin Classics here. We're doing a batch for the first time in a while. He started with Where Angels Fear to Tread. That was his first novel in this pretty Penguin Black Spine classic. This is edited with notes by Oliver Stallybrass and has an introduction by Ruth Paddle. And it's the story of a sort of familiar pattern with Forster where a stereotypical Englishman goes to Italy. And things happen, but underneath the surface, it's pretty clear what Forster is writing. He's writing him a stand-in of himself falling in love with a man in Italy. That is not the plot of the book. There's heterosexual love all throughout the book, but nevertheless. The same thing is true with, he wrote Room with a View. There's another Penguin Classic volume. And then his 2 most famous books. There's Howard's End, and then his last novel, Passage to India. And you notice these penguins are all the same. They all have the same cover design of these slightly tinted old photos. And these 4 are the ones I have for E.M. Forster. I don't know. I once again did not do my due diligence. Well, I don't know how much of E.M. Forster Penguin Classics publishes. I'm pretty sure they publish all of the novels, and I just don't have them all. I don't know that they publish any of the nonfiction, and I'm pretty sure there's no big collection of letters from Penguin Classic or anything like that. Or his book, he wrote a nonfiction book, sort of tough to classify nonfiction book about the novel that is actually very, very good, very entertaining to read. I don't think the Penguin does that either, so it's half and half. I have A Passage to India, Howard's End, A Room with a View, and Where Angels Fear to Tread. I do not have in the Penguin Classic this. This is an old Norton classic of his novel Morris, which is about a young man falling in love with another young man, openly this time, as opposed to heavily coded, as happens in so many of Forster's novels. In this case, it wasn't coded. And Forster wrote it and then locked it away. And it didn't get published until long after he was dead. At the time that he wrote it, maybe not at the time when he died. He died in 1970. Most people he seems so thoroughly a creature of the Edwardian era that it seems almost impossible to believe that E.M. Forster died in 1970. But nevertheless, by the time he died, the world had radically changed. But when he wrote Morris, it was illegal. The things he was describing in the book, it was a fantasy in the most dangerous kind of sense. And I don't have this in a Penguin Classic. I know that it exists. I just don't have it. And I don't have his collections of nonfiction, 2 Cheers for Democracy and whatnot, and I don't have aspects of the novel at all, in any format. But nevertheless, your Penguins for today are strong recommends. Very strong. Now, this is an author where almost certainly if you have had him shoved in front of you in school, it's been for Howard's End. But he was not really obsessed. Obsessed is not genteel enough, but he was concerned with all of the major topics that absorbed the Edwardians, from colonialism to the relationship between the sexes, to the proper role of social progressive crusading and ideology in the mind of a normal person, a normal button-down professional person. And his nonfiction is saturated with concern about the role of the writer, that tired old subject. The role of the writer and the ethics of responsibility if you have a voice, if you have an audience. And boy, oh boy, after Howard's End and after Passage to India, Forster had an audience. Those were big books. So was March of Literature, I want to say the March of Literature. I've got Ford Maddox Ford on the mind. Aspects of the novel was also a hit. Everybody was talking about it when it came out. And who knows how long that would have continued? Who knows what more we'd have gotten from Forster? I mean, The Burgess jokes notwithstanding, he did live to write. He would have written more novels almost certainly, except that he had the bad luck to encounter D.H. Lawrence. And among other effects on him, D.H. Lawrence convinced him, or rather blathered at him to the point where he froze as a writer. Now, people have laid that freezing at the doorstep of many different things. I am willing to blame D.H. Lawrence, who wasn't bad enough that he inflicted his own crappy novels on the world and introduced to the reading public, especially the hustling writing public, that if you write about poverty and especially pornography, then you can write poorly and get away with it. No one's going to be looking, in other words, at your Forsterian rhetorical ability if you pick your subjects right. And didn't he carry the day? He absolutely carried the day. And he wanted to convey that to Forster. The famous motto of Howard Zand is "Only Connect." And Lawrence mocked Forster, mocked that motto to Forster's face. You with your "only connect" business, but what in these novels is alive? In his sense, meaning undressed and fornicating against itself. That's what he meant when he said alive. What is it? What in these books is alive? And the clear implication of his rhetorical question is that nothing is. Try reading A Room with a View. Try reading it and telling me there's nothing in it that's alive. It just proves that D.H. Lawrence was as bad a reader as he was a writer. It doesn't take long wandering through his nonfiction to shore up that belief. But this isn't about D.H. Lawrence. This is about E.M. Forster. It is a very strong recommend. I should have everything that Penguin makes of his, but Penguin ought to make everything of his, and I don't think they do. Avenger Harvest and Two Cheers for Democracy ought to exist either separately or in one volume. Maybe a big generous volume of the collected nonfiction of E.M. Forster, with the nonfiction volumes and aspect of the novel, and maybe a very generous smattering of letters. That would be great. Such a volume would be great. Forster's letters are amazing. He was an odd fellow in many, many ways. I strongly recommend Furbank's biography of him. Nice big thing, but as I've mentioned on this channel, whenever I've had occasion to bring it up, it reads like a Forster novel, so you're not going to feel it at all, that the length of it. It's a full-dressed formal biography, but it's a delight to read. And he makes the point over and over again in that book, and so have other people. So, for instance, all of Forster's correspondence, which is what a remarkable figure he is, brutally honest with himself, in as many ways as he knew how to be, and a rigorous craftsman. Again, I'm not going to dwell on D.H. Lawrence, but he was a rigorous craftsman, even when he was really young. I think he wrote this when he was in his 20s. And it just continued after that, where he would labor over his books and carefully craft them. And it works after all this time. He didn't write that much, but everything he wrote is immensely worth your time to read, fiction and nonfiction. So your Penguin for today has got a little Penguin adjacent here, because we've got a Norton paperback there as well. I don't have the Penguin of Morris, but I should. And your Penguin for today is a huge recommend. This is E.M. Forster, the great E.M. Forster. And this inches us a little bit closer to the end of... the end is still a long way off, but this inches us a little bit closer to the end of our daily Penguins. Whenever we can do a block of books, this is always a tiny bit of a time saver. So your Penguin for today is a recommend. E.M. Forster. If you haven't read E.M. Forster, maybe for some reason you're a little intimidated by Howard's End, or maybe a little intimidated by A Passage to India, then pick A Room with a View. It's a nice short thing. It'll take you an hour to read. Pick that. I'd be willing to bet that if you've never encountered this author before and you read a short work like Where Angels Fear to Tread, he didn't particularly love that title. He would have come up with something more boring. or A Room with a View. If you haven't read this author and you maybe are a little intimidated, because he is in many ways the last gasp of literary formalism, if you feel that way, then pick a short novel. Pick A Room with a View and read it. You'll be enchanted. I believe you'll be enchanted, and then you'll want more. So your Penguin for today is a recommend, and also a block of books. What's the matter, baby? What's the matter? Huh? Oh, somebody's a little restive. Aren't you? You're a little restive. Huh? You want to go outside and walk around, scream at people. Yes, you do. Well, we'll have to do that then, won't we? We will. We'll have to do that. Uh, in the meantime, I'm going to wrap this up for now, and we'll see what we encounter tomorrow on our Daily Penguin. So I'll see you then. Thank you, BookTube.